your body, my body, doesn't know this is practice. Doesn't know that this, that's it. Doesn't know this is practice. Your body, the body, this body, your client's body, your partner's body, doesn't know this is practice. In fact, that whole conversation that you have in your head is gibberish to the body. Body doesn't speak in that language. Cognitive function happens in the head. Cognitive function is a mental thing. Cognitive function is not a somatic thing. Cognitive function is not a body thing. When you think you understand something, and you think that your body should be in tune with that, again, that's just gibberish. Gibbery jabbery, gibbery jabbery. I believe my body should, fill in the blanks. Gibbery jabbery. I believe that I should feel in my body a certain way. Gibbery jabbery. That the mind of the body operates in a completely different realm. And when I say operates in a completely different realm, I mean literally like in another dimensional realm from the mind, from the brain. So in classic Ayurveda, and I talked about this in the Ayurveda lectures, which of course should have been overwhelming to you because I talk about a lot of things in the Ayurvedic lectures, but one of the things I talked about was the 5 koshas of the body. The 5 bodily sheaths, the physical body, the pranic body, the breath body, the blissful body, the Anandamaya kosha, etc. Okay? Well, you could look at that model of 5 rings of the 5 bodies, and you could also say that is 5 different dimensions. 5 different dimensions coexisting in the same moment in the same place, which happens to be the same moment in the same place that your cognitive consciousness is cohabitating in real time right now, and we're all sharing that together. But the thing about it is we are multidimensional beings sharing a manifestation which is in and of itself occurring in multiple dimensions. Again, it's another thing that the ancient scriptures are talking about when they say that the world is not real, and that the world is Maya, and that the God of the world is illusion, because you don't see that. You don't see that your body has a completely different consciousness and way of being that's completely separate from your mind, because there's a trick of psychology that we all think that we're one. Even though, even to describe myself as one, I say we all think. Me, myself, and I are one. Me, myself, and I, and my body, even the parts of my body. In fact, in Chinese medicine, we are a community. There's no such thing as a singular I or a singular person in Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine. Why is that? Because your intelligence is organic. And what the TCM teaches, what the word organic means, it's not what you think it means. All right, we're not talking about vegetables without pesticide. This is way older use of the word. The organic first time that concept of organic is used is in the Nanjing and the Yellow Emperor's Classic, both of those books written over 3,000 years ago. And what they meant was organ-derived. So you have 6 hollow and 6 solid organs. And each of them, so 6 hollow and 6 solid organs, so 6 male organs, or 6 female organs and 6 male organs. And each of them has a mind. Each of them has a mind. And They are described in the Nanjing, which is a really big book. Maybe Ken, if you'll remind me tomorrow, there's a couple of books I'd like to just have out. I'm really big into books. The library I have now is a third of what I used to have. I actually went through a cleansing period where I gave away 1,000 books. Okay, I gave away 1,000 books, and so the 1,000 that I have now is what's left over after I gave away 1,000 books that I really wasn't resourcing as much anymore, and they're covering dust, and I thought, I'll give them to libraries and other schools and that kind of thing, and hopefully they'll get some use out of it, especially if they haven't read them. But for example, the Nanjing is this big, it's this thick. This is the oldest book on traditional Chinese medicine. If you're going to be an OMD or an Oriental medical doctor, whether you specialize in herbology or acupuncture, you got to know what's in that book. That's what acupuncture is. That's what traditional Chinese medicine is. That's where theory of 5 elements comes from. That's where theory of meridians comes from. That's where that chart comes from. Okay, and the understandings of them, that's where the Chinese astrology, all that stuff, believe it or not, comes from one book. Okay, all that stuff comes from one book. So in that one book, it talks about the 6 hollow and the 6 solid organs, and each one is described in great detail as a complex personality with very diverse characteristics. And so, for example, and then on top of the organs, you have the different kinds of qi. Shen qi, Zhen qi, Wei qi. It's not just qi. You know, people say, oh, qi, yeah, it's like prana. I'm like, which qi is like which prana? Because there's 5 pranas and there's 5 qis. So which ones are similar and which ones are not? Of course, most people don't even need to know that. I'm creating classical distinctions here. But I'll give you a really good example of something that is delved into deeply in the Nanjing that's relevant to this idea that you don't know yourself, and that causes problems. All right, my favorite actor in the community of qis, my favorite qi is the Wei qi. My favorite qi is the Wei qi. And the Wei qi is described as an officious bureaucrat. So we already know the Wei qi has a job description, and bureaucracy is under the emperor. The emperor is in charge, but the emperor doesn't run the empire. Okay? Bureaucrats run the empire. Okay, the emperor's in his palace and is secluded and isolated. And maybe in traditional Chinese history, there was a period of time where if you looked at the emperor without permission, you and your whole family would be put to death immediately. If you're a common person and you happen to catch the emperor going from here to there out the corner of your eye, and somebody noticed that you noticed the emperor, immediately you would be put to death, and then they would hunt down your whole family, every man, woman, and child, and then they would execute them publicly, drag them right out of their house, and chop their heads out on the front yard. This was actually the law in Thailand for over 1,000 years. That if you physically looked at the king without permission, without being asked to, you could be put to death right then, right there, right on the spot, and then they would hunt down your whole family, every man, woman, and child, and they would kill all of them too. It's barbarous, but it's history. So the Wei qi is an officious bureaucrat whose job is to interview applicants for audience for the emperor. Okay, so the Wei qi's job is a bureaucrat whose job is to interview applicants who want to have an interview or want FaceTime with the emperor. And probably you would have gone through a couple of other intermediary steps before you get to the Wei qi bureaucracy, the office of the Wei qi. And then this bureaucrat This Wei Qi, the bureaucrat, pretend that's the name of a person, because it's described as a person, okay? Even to how the person is dressed. So Nanjing even describes how that bureaucrat is dressed. Dressed to impress, okay? Dressed appropriate for the authority. And wielding seals, sigils, and seals of the emperor, and empowered to not only to decide who gets an audience with the emperor, but whether you should be allowed to live another minute just for asking. Because you could go to this bureaucrat and you could ask for permission to talk to the emperor, and the bureaucrat could decide that that is a complete waste of the emperor's time, or that perhaps they suspect that you have ulterior motives, and literally right there while you're applying for an audience, they could have somebody come in and kill you. That's some authority. In fact, that bureaucrat could kill you himself and no liability, because that's his job. That's his job. All right, so in Chinese medicine, if we take who is the Wei Qi, or what is the Wei Qi in the sense of the beingness of a person, okay? The Wei Qi is what we call in English terms the immune system. And the clothing of the bureaucrat is your skin. And the clothing of the bureaucrat is the lining of your mouth and sinus and esophagus. The clothing of the bureaucrat is your stomach, and the lining of your stomach, and the lining of the small intestine, and the large intestine, and the duodenum, and the rectum. That's the clothing of this bureaucrat, this powerful, powerful bureaucrat. And when the Wei Qi is strong, the kingdom is sound, and the emperor is safe. So not only does this bureaucrat keep just people wasting the emperor's time, trying to take up the emperor's time with things of no consequence. Another job of the Wei Qi bureaucrat is to protect the emperor from assassins. Assassins. Other systems that would seek to overthrow the emperor and take over. Other systems which might represent a form of insanity, if you will, that want to depose the emperor in order to burn the kingdom to the ground. And this Wei Qi, this Qi, is in charge of protecting you. So now the Wei Qi in Chinese medicine has a character, has a personality, has a way that he dresses, a way that he walks, a way that he talks. They even describe his desk. That in fact, his office is like a little throne room, because he's an officious bureaucrat. He's not just a bureaucrat, he's an officious bureaucrat. And he personally carries the signs and the seals and the sigils of the emperor, which means in certain aspects, whatever he says goes as if you heard it from the emperor himself. That's the kind of authority that the Wei Qi has. If the Wei Qi's office is attended to, the kingdom is safe and operates sufficiently. And the king can sleep like a baby. The king can sleep when the king wants to sleep, and then the king can come and go as the king wants to go to rule the kingdom and all the various parts of the kingdom in the most efficient way possible. And if the Wei Qi, if the office of that bureaucracy, of that bureaucrat is not well attended, eventually the emperor will suffer. And as the emperor suffers, so does the rest of the kingdom. Because the kingdom is the body of the emperor. The kingdom is the body of the emperor. But the kingdom is not the emperor. Because the emperor lives in a place above the kingdom. And that's why the Imperial Palace in Beijing is built on platforms, which are built on tiers of platforms and stairs that are built on tiers. It's an actual pyramid, step pyramid, just like in Giza, Egypt, and just like in Mexico City at Teotihuacan, and just like in Chichen Itza, and just like it's a step pyramid, and the palace of the emperor is on top, is what is on top of that step pyramid. And it has 4 entrances, one for each of the cardinal directions, exact on the compass, and then the center of the palace is halfway between heaven and the heart of the earth. So the palace of the emperor is the center of the world and is separate from the world. And so the emperor rules the world from a place that's not actually in the world. It's another dimension. In Ayurveda, that dimension where the emperor lives is called Anandamaya Kosha. That's the innermost dimension of being. And it is the only part of the 5 bodies that actually has the perspective of infinite life without limitation of space and time. Because that is where, if there is a soul, if there is a connection to spirit, if there is an Atman, if there is a golden thread, it's in that place where that connection occurs. And the dimensions that come from that place, in other words, as the sacred infinite interacts with the material manifest world, it manifests in each of the subsequent bodies until we get to the hard shell physical body. And then what's interesting is that the pranic body is off of the physical body. You know, you might think the physical body is the most external and the prana is internal to that. It's exactly opposite. The physical body comes before the pranic body. Why is that? Because you can bump into my pranic body 50 feet before you bump into my physical body. And even though each of these bodies is phase shifted from the next subsequent, above and below, instead of thinking of them as tiers of an onion, let's do like Robert Flood did in the 11th century and his followers through the 17th century, and we think of it as a tiered hierarchy from highest to lowest. Okay, that each of the tiers, which Robert Flood called in the 1400s, Robert Flood called the ray of creation, and so the lower realms were in connection to just the next realm, even though they were all under the umbrella of the highest realms of the ray of creation. Okay, and so, but the realms or the bodies that were most affected by God, which is the highest order of the ray of creation, it was limited based on where they were in this hierarchy. And so from one point of view, in the lowest realms, which we call the hell realms, or the lowest energy realms of manifestation, all they see, all they know is what they see and feel. Mostly feel. So in the lowest realms of the ray of creation, the consciousness is determined by feeling. And by feeling, I mean sensate consciousness. The consciousness of sensation. Defining the world that you have as an internal world and the external world. Your perspective on life is 100% based on how you feel in the moment physically. How you feel in the moment physically. And if you don't feel it, it's not real. And what you feel, whatever it is, good or bad, becomes the nature of your reality. It becomes the crucible of your reality. It becomes how high your reality is, how wide your reality is, how deep your reality is, how far your reality can extend, and it's all entirely based on how you feel in the moment. Which means if your feelings change from moment to moment, then your whole world ebbs and flows and swells and contracts. based on that feeling. And the next higher realm, excuse me, it's another iteration of feeling, but it's feeding into the other sensations. In other words, I'll believe it when I see it. So see, that world is a little bigger because I can see farther than I can feel. I'll believe it when I see it. I'll believe it when I hear it. I'll know that it's true by the sound of it, like the old RCA advertisements from after the phonograph was invented, when the Edison phonograph was invented and was first patented, mass production by the company RCA, and their advertisement was a spotted dog, the same dog that was in Our Gang, spotted dog sitting in front of a trumpet horn on an Edison phonograph. And the dog sitting like this, and the caption of it was, the reason the dog was sitting in front of this phonograph is because he recognizes the voice of his master, which was how they were saying that this artificial reproduction of sound, they were trying to convince people that it was as real as the real sound. That in fact, if you listen to a reproduction of someone's voice on the Edison phonograph, if they weren't in the room, you would think that they're in the room. Or you would think that they're in the next room. And if you were a dog and you played a recording of your master's voice, the dog would come running, because the dog would mistake that sound for his master's voice. That's wonderful marketing. It's a beautiful concept. But of course it wasn't true. And if you've ever listened to an Edison phonograph, it sounds anything but real, right? Because it's frequency limited as far as the expression of the frequencies. There are much greater frequencies in the human voice than they were ever able to reproduce. Okay, but now, so what if your reality is based on what you hear? That's one of the five senses. In other words, I'll believe it when I see it, and then I'll know it when I hear it. And we use hearing a lot as our lie detector. Hearing is one of our lie detector skills. Well, I could tell they were lying. Well, how could you tell they were lying? Well, they just sounded like they were lying. Okay? And this goes on unconsciously because it's a function of the machine. It's a function. All the five senses are mechanical and machine-like and are animalistic and have no particular higher consciousness that relates to them one way or the other. And then we talk about the cheese. Well, they also are consciousness. See, the thing about the bureaucrat of the Wei Qi is not conscious. The Wei Qi is more conscious than the organs in the story of Chinese medicine, of the body, right? Of the universe of the body, the emperor's kingdom, okay? More conscious, but it's what we call relative conscious. Relatively conscious. Because that function, that bureaucratic function, that officious bureaucrat, has no more thought, has no more attitude, has no more inclinations, has no more assertiveness or non-assertiveness, or for that matter, no more choice in being than that which is delegated to it by the emperor. So in other words, the officious bureaucrat of the Wei Qi can't step out and come up with his own agenda. He can't go off somewhere and start his own kingdom. He can't, in fact, he is a slave. The one thing you get after you're hearing all these wonderful descriptions and what a beautiful, powerful position and the authority and the discernment and discrimination is insane that this bureaucrat has, only to learn and further along in the story that he's a slave just like everyone else, but just a different kind. And then he talks about the organs. And each organ has a personality that's described as a person. Each organ, the liver is a person. So what we call an organ is actually an entity. What we call a spleen, it's not a piece of meat. inside of us. It is a living entity inside of us. What we call the stomach is an entity inside of us. What we call the heart, and we put a lot of prestige on the heart, right? It's kind of the emperor of the body. It's kind of how we treat it, even though we like to say our mind is in charge. Depends on who you're talking to, right? Which is more important, your brain or your heart? Which can you live longer without? Actually, you can live forever without a brain. If I only had a brain. you can live forever without a brain. You can't live a minute without a heart. So which is more important? Okay? But yet, really, we can't live as a conscious being without either. They're equally important from the point of view of manifesting consciousness in a temporal world. So the organs, the 6 hollow and the 6 solid organs, the 12 organs, for which the meridians are their voice and their sense. So every meridian is both an expression of, and it is the sensing apparatus of an entity which is called an organ. So the lungs have the lung meridian, right? Lung 1 is right here, lung 2 is right here, and then you have another 9 points that end up on the inside corner of my thumbnail right here, where lung 11 is. So I have my 11 lung points from here to here, and it's bilateral, so I have it on both arms, right? Well, lung is the meridian of expression of the lung meridian of my actual lungs. But it is also how my actual lungs gather information from the world and from the universe. It's a two-way transceiver. It's a two-way communication system. It's not one way. All the meridians are not one way. And along the way of this path of communication, both way, two-way system that they represent, each of the meridians in turn communicates to other meridians. In fact, it's really weird. From Chinese medicine viewpoint, and Ayurveda too, to a certain degree, we are schizophrenic. If you understand the idea of a true multiple personality disorder, if you understand the fundamentals of a true multiple personality disorder, I have no less than 12 organ people living inside of me, each one with a domain, each one with what makes them happy and what makes them unhappy, each one with what radio station and kind of music they want to listen to, and each one with what they want to avoid, each one with what they like and don't like. Living in a community of 11 others who all have the same faculties. And then here's where it gets really, really weird. I love this stuff, by the way. Because the weirder, the better, as far as I'm concerned. Okay? Because each one, every 2 hours, becomes a different one. So, for example, your lung organ entity with its meridians only exists in the body as that identity for 2 hours of 24. So only 2 hours of 24. And then it morphs into large intestine. It becomes, and lung function gone. Shut down, not happening. Why? Because now large intestine is ascendant, and large intestine for those next 2 hours is freaking in charge. Freaking in charge. As if there never was a lung. As if there never was a lung. And none of the other entities are ascendant or have precedent or have rights or obligations over that of the large intestine until the large intestine turns into the next meridian. And then 12 times a day for a 2-hour period, each individual is in charge of you.